To breathe efficiently is a fundamental asset for every wind player, especially flutists. In fact, we need to breathe in a large amount of air, both as quickly as possible and as silently as possible. Breathing efficiently requires learning how to control the air that we breathe into our instrument. However, even more important is to learn how to exhale the air. In fact, how long a sound is sustained and its quality both depend on the ability to control how air is breathed in and out. Let's start from the beginning and let's review the breathing process. Breathing is made up of two different phases. First, we inhale, we let the air into our body, then we exhale, we let the air out. But what exactly happens to our body during this process? When we inhale, the air enters our mouth, goes down to the heart cavities, and eventually fills the lungs, that are two spongy organs that inflate when the air fills them up and deflate when the air is going back up to the vocal tract. Many other organs of the human body are involved in the respiratory process. For example, the rib cage expands when the air enters the lungs, giving them the necessary space to grow in volume. Another fundamental organ involved in the breathing process is the diaphragm. Most of us have probably heard all about the diaphragm in our flute lessons. However, it might not have been in the most correct of ways. So let's clarify a little bit what the diaphragm is and what exactly it does. The diaphragm is a dome-shaped muscle located below the lungs. It divides the thorax cavity from the abdomen. During the inhaling phase, the diaphragm flattens down, thus creating a vacuum that allows the air to be sucked into the lungs. Moreover, its contraction also produces the rib cage expansion, allowing the lungs inflation. During the exhaling phase, the diaphragm goes back on its rest position, and in doing so, it squeezes the lungs, provoking the exit of the air. At the same time, the rib cage collapses, going back to the resting position. Therefore, a sound's duration is highly dependent on our ability to slow down the air's exit from the lungs, which in turn depends on how fast the diaphragm goes back to its resting position. So the real question is, can we control the diaphragm recoil, and if so, how? The breathing process is a very complex phenomenon that depends on many different factors. The diaphragm is directly controlled by the phrenic nerve, which belongs to the central nervous system and in turn responds to biologically determined needs, happening thanks to complex chemical and molecular mechanisms. But simply, we can't directly control the diaphragm. However, we can partially influence its movement through intercostal and abdominal muscles. What does that mean in practice? That simply means that we can try to slow down the diaphragm's recoil by controlling the abdominal muscles and thus slowing down the air's exit from the lungs. Basically, we need to compress the air's column inside our body, which increases the air pressure. Air pressure is a key factor in flute playing, and we will clarify it in a moment. One of the first wind players who became interested in respiratory mechanisms and extensively spoke about them was Arnold Jacobs, a legendary tuba player who had been the master of North American brass school. He was among the first to pinpoint the misuse of the word diaphragm, and he strongly opposed the tight gut method, since then prevalent among brass players. The tight gut method involves the keeping the diaphragm flattened down by contracting the abdominal muscle, hardening them and pushing them down, and at the same time closing the throat, thus enormously increasing the air's pressures inside the body. However, according to Jacobs, this effort was way too excessive and is absolutely not required, especially for tuba players. The tuba, in fact, is an instrument that doesn't require high-pressure air to be played well. However, Jacobs recognized that different instruments require different compression of the air column, and that the higher the range of the instrument, the higher the air compression needs to be, like the trumpet, for example. In any case, Jacobs explains that the natural breath is sufficient to get the requested air pressure in brass playing. Furthermore, the best way to regulate the quantity of air blown in the instrument is through the lips. Talking about wind instruments, Jacobs affirms that in that case the function of regulating the exiting air is done by the reed, that literally works as a valve that doses the airstream. Correct! But what about the flute that doesn't have any reed? Jacobs briefly mentions that for singing and playing the flute, things are a bit different because in both cases there is no mouthpiece or reed to slow down the air's exit. That's why singers and flutists will have to rely on a biological reed that functions as a valve for controlling the airstream, and that is the throat. What? The throat? Yes, exactly, the throat. An extensive explication of the use of the throat in controlling the air's exit comes from a colleague and friend of Jacobs, another important representative of the American brass school, the hornist Philip Farkas. In his book, he writes about the necessity to actively use the throat as a way to create some resistance to the air's exit. Basically, the throat is a valve that increases the air's pressures and slows it down on its way to exit the human body. That must be shocking for most flutists who probably grew up in the myth of always keeping an open and inactive throat, an idea largely supported and sponsored by most flutists and flute teachers worldwide. In fact, in the traditional flute pedagogy, the only mentioned and allowed tool for regulating the airstream has always been, and still largely is, the lips. However, in the last 20 years, some flutists have started challenging this and are actively promoting the throat and its active use. Among them are the American flutist Robert Dick, the Italian flutist Giampaolo Preto, and the Canadian flutist and researcher Isabelle Cossette. Robert Dick is one of the most prominent American flutists. He's a specialist of contemporary music and extended techniques, and the author of many books on contemporary techniques. He has deeply analyzed the sound production process and investigated new ways to improve sound quality and air emission. Recently, he started talking about the idea of throat tuning, a technique that seeks for an active use of the throat as a tool to obtain a richer timbral palette and thus enlarges the flute expressivity. Giampaolo Preto is both a performer and flute pedagogist. He has been holding the principal chairs at the Italian Radio and Television Orchestra for more than 30 years, and at the same time is an engaged teacher. Like Dick, he is supporting the use of the throat as a fundamental tool in flute emission technique, considering it as a valve for regulating air's quantity. In his method called Into the Sound, Preto talks more in general about the importance of regulating the airstream before it arrives to the lips. The mouth cavity is actually an extremely useful resource for sound projection and timbral palette, and it allows the flutist to impress a more personal and colorful voice to his musical ideas. Finally, Isabelle Cossette is a pioneer scientific researcher applied to the physiology of flute playing. She founded at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, the first laboratory in North America that uses the newest technologies and machinery to analyze the breathing process in relation to the flute playing, working in collaboration with the engineers, acoustics, and techs. Studies reveal that how to approach air emission is a highly individualized process, and the different flutists use slightly different techniques in order to achieve the desired result. The same is valid for breathing. In fact, it seems that each flutist uses the muscle involved in the breathing process in a different way. However, something that remains as a constant is that without exception, the diaphragm doesn't play a crucial role in supporting the sound. According to Cossette, in fact, the different techniques used by different flutists to slow down the air's exit from the body are limited to abdominal muscle control, lips opening, and use of the throat as a valve. So you're free to play exactly as you want, always considering that in order to play well and to be a good flutist, it's not necessary to know exactly how the breathing process works. However, a better understanding of respiratory mechanism can be important if you're a teacher and if you need to solve a pupil's problem. Furthermore, to widen our understanding of the processes that support our playing can keep us curious and open-minded, and can provide us with some more tools for realizing our artistic goals.